started for the SNR seminar series. So today we have Professor Troy Gilmore. Professor Gilmore received his PhD from North Carolina State University and has been with the university almost 10 years now, 8 years.
10.
So working for Conservation Survey Division on a number of different projects. So today he's going to talk to us about amplifying ecohydrological discovery using ground-based time-lapse imagery. So I'll turn it over to Troy.
Thanks, Trenton. Thanks, everybody, for coming today, and for those of you on Zoom who are joining as well. Yeah, I'd like to share with you today about some of the people and the process and software that we're working on to try to make it easier to use ground-based time-lapse imagery for a variety of research projects. Worked earlier. Any advice? Maybe I'll just use the. Oh, I see. All right. Thanks. All right, thanks, Trenton. So it turns out that I'm not the only Ohioan or part of the Geological Survey to come to Nebraska and think about pictures of water. This is our first state geologist in Nebraska, and looks like he took a photo from a train in 1894 of the Platte River there, so you can see water and habitat in that image. This next image takes you out to one of my favorite places in Nebraska. I grew up out in the country. I like Lincoln a lot, but it's kind of nice to go out somewhere like this and have some open space. And the streams here represent groundwater, which is a lot of my research background, groundwater fed streams, and you're seeing the effect of some recent high water here in those pools next to the stream. Those are the kind of things that I'm looking at in imagery like this, thinking about the aquifer underneath as well as the stream. Some of you might like this one better. We got a little bit of wildlife in this one. This is out in the central part of the sand hills on the university's ranch. This one has some bit of wildlife too, a little bit harder to pick out. Still seeing eyes scanning. If you zoom back there, we got a little ghost in the background there. So the general idea is that even on a landscape like this, which is pretty brown, and you kind of have a brownish colored stream in the foreground here, plain sky in the background, that people from different disciplines or different backgrounds or whatever might be looking at different things in this image, might overlook that guy in there if you're looking at something else. And it's been kind of interesting to work a little bit with Heather Aiken, who is in the ALEC department. Heather has expertise in creating surveys and thinking about communication and how people might view imagery and how it might affect their perception of water, for example, or other things in the images. Of course, we're seeing the sandhill cranes in this image that comes from the Platte Basin time-lapse archives. And for this particular work, Heather took several images and put them into a survey that people could look at. This was kind of to mimic the general public looking at imagery. And one of the things they were able to do is click on the image to show us kind of where they instinctively looked in this scene. And so this is the heat map from that. We're not doing eye tracking for this, but they can click on a few places that interested them. So then that becomes interesting to us about where they're looking. You can see them, not surprisingly, looking at the group of birds over there and also in the sky. But then also in the foreground, we have this bar along the edge of the Platte River here, and they seem to be looking, for whatever reason, there's kind of a hot spot right in here. I wondered if they might have been, you know, they see other wildlife here, maybe they're looking over here for, see if there's any wildlife sitting there, or we just happened to sample a whole bunch of geomorphologists, I guess, maybe looking at that. But point being that different people are going to look at different things in these images, and that's what we're finding as we work with other scientists who are interested. Lots of people are starting to put out trail cams at their research sites, and they're all coming at kind of little different angles and seeing a lot of different things in these images, which just illustrates how much information is embedded in an image like this, just even a single image of a landscape like this. So this is mixed slide out at Gudmundsson Research Lab, and here's the heat map of where people were looking at this image. The stream, for me, the stream would be the obvious place to look. I'm not surprised that people are looking right up here in the front, but we also have this cut area here where the stream is cut into this dune and expose that sand, and a lot of people were looking back there. Some people were looking up at the maybe the threatening looking sky, and then down here in the foreground you see this one little flower that caught a lot of attention as well. And we recently had some people reach out to us that were interested in looking at rare plant species with a camera, for example, and it was kind of in a odd situation where some human interaction in the environment, it seemed like it might have actually been promoting the growth of this really rare plant. So it's kind of interesting conversations that can come out of imagery and the potential for using them for research. So in this scene, we're seeing a lot of space, right? And obviously satellite's a whole nother, or aerial imagery gives you a whole nother perspective, but these ground-based cameras can give you a lot of landscape, a lot of information to look at spatially. But you can also, when you start doing the time-lapse piece, get that time component as well. And so this is, I'm going to highlight a study done by Mary Harner at the University of Nebraska at Kearney. We work together a lot now. And at the time, Emma Brindley Buckley was working with Mary as well. But this just illustrates both these kind of array of images here. You can see the same day in 2 different years, and you can also see those changes seasonally for a wetland area in around near the Platte River. And so we start to bring in that time component, and then you can really start to see some dynamics that are happening. In this case, the amount of kind of inundated or open water area in this space. And so Emma used some image processing techniques, in this case, to draw out of these images automatically with some training, the areas of the image that were inundated. And then down here, you have the percent of the image that's classified as open water on the vertical axis, and you have 2011 through 2017 across the bottom. And you can quickly see that you have those dynamics of the water being visible in the image and contracting on a yearly basis here. So this is some of the power of imagery, is to capture those dynamics even on this percentage basis that we wouldn't be able to necessarily capture if we just had a sensor sitting in the middle of this area. Mary and others are also bringing in a variety of other sensors that pair well with imagery. Mary has, for example, has recorders out to look at or to listen to acoustic activity, in this case of a specific frog. So you start thinking about habitat, and that's tied in with the imagery that we just saw, and then maybe you bring in the weather and climate or other type of sensor data to augment what you're observing, and maybe try to start to make predictions about things related to this animal or this habitat. So this is where the way that we're trying to think about imagery is, in and of itself, it's a really powerful tool, and then it's really nice to be able to pair together with these other traditional ways of sensing the environment that we already have. This is another credit to Platte Basin Time-lapse for their imagery and creating this composite slice image. So this location is along the western edge of Nebraska on the North Platte River. There is a weir there that the water flows over. This is a really important location for accounting for how much water comes from Wyoming into Nebraska. And each of these vertical slices you see here accounts or kind of illustrates what that scene looks like for a given month of the year. So you're working from January to December across this image. So when we looked at this image as a hydrologist, some of the things that we're seeing, for example, are that you have different flow rates, you have different textures on the water here, you have whitewater area downstream of the weir as it's pouring over there, depending on the flow rate. So we started looking at these different features, different colors as well. We start looking at those different features that are in these images, and we're wondering, is there enough information that we could extract out of these images to actually reconstruct measured stream flow at this site? So the USGS has a gauge here. So we have the actual data, but that gave us a chance to say, well, what if we lost funding for our gauge for a year? Maybe you have a 3-year grant that ends and there's a year and then you get another grant or something like that. And you happen to have this documentary camera out here. And so this was a idea that we tested out. And so we used imagery from before, imagery along with the actual USGS data before and after a 1-year period where we simulated like we had lost that gauge for a year. And the question was, could we train and test a model in order to use then imagery for that intermediate year in order to predict the actual stream flow? And so we built that model. It's a machine learning model. And essentially what we want to compare here to compare our model to the real flow is the blue is the real flow with the shading showing the uncertainty in that measurement. And then the orange along there is the flow that's predicted by extracting features out of those images and feeding those into our machine learning model. So clearly not perfect. We can go back to one thing that's nice is we can go back to the images and see if this model makes any sense. But we can pretty well reconstruct a hydrograph for year-long periods. There was 1 year that was pretty far off because we had some really high flows. We split that into 6 months and we could make a good model there. So there's a lot of information in these images. The challenge, though, is that this is fairly complicated to do this kind of work. There's some, maybe a little bit easier now with some of the AI tools as far as coding and so on, but it's still pretty complicated workflows. This workflow on the right-hand side was for that project on the North Platte River. This top one was for Emma's project, and I know she used pulled together several different software or tools in order to do that. And then down on the bottom here is some of an example workflow that comes out of one of our recent proposals. But this is pretty complex, particularly for someone like myself who doesn't have a computer science background, doesn't do a ton of coding. And so this is one of our barriers to using this kind of imagery. Then if you look at something like Platte Basin Time-lapse that has all of these cameras all across a watershed, it's very challenging for a lot of students anyway, to pick one site and do something like that North Platte Weir project. But if you really wanted to, and this is what Mary and I have talked about a lot, to do something kind of across the whole watershed with multiple cameras, then that barrier goes up even higher to do something like that. So we've mentioned the Platte Basin Time-lapse several times. They have 70+ cameras across the Platte River Basin. This image shows, at least for the US, the portion of PhenoCam and USGS cameras that are now out on the landscape. This inset down here shows how PhenoCam is actually pretty global as well. But PhenoCam is a a large repository. We'll talk more about it, but they have over 900 cameras, and some of those have been out for over a decade. It's a lot of imagery. Some of those are taking images at maybe a half hour type time step. And USGS has a bunch of these cameras that have spun up very quickly since about 2022. And a number of those cameras are taking 15-minute imagery. So there are lots and lots of images out there that we can have access to. In addition, we have the Mesonet. South Dakota itself, probably, I tried to count today, but it's probably in the hundreds up there, and Nebraska, and I think there's another state as well that has cameras at their sites, as I mentioned, PBT. And then we're having more and more people coming to us talking about, we want to put a trail camera out, how do we do it? And we've been putting trail cameras out off and on at least since about 2009. There are also community science projects where people are taking cell phone imagery, and so basically, I'm not sure how many cameras are out there or will be in the near future, but there's just lots and lots of data, and we need some more efficient ways for people to work with that. So this brings us finally to our why for a lot of this talk, and that is we have imagery that is beautiful, but also highly informative. There's a lot of unrealized potential there in those images. There are major challenges to trying to work with that imagery. A lot of us don't have the skills to spin a project like that up very quickly. And then we've kind of added this additional piece down here because of the variety of people that we work with and the ways that imagery has really helped us have conversations with a lot of different people. We really want to have a diverse user base for the software that I'm going to tell you about. So we really want to support research, education, and communication with what we're doing. So, so far, our users are humans. This one, we haven't been able to get any field notes out of, but he does seem to be taking a close look at the stage there at the Kearney Outdoor Learning Area. Since we're not getting information directly from him, we use, for this site, GRIME 2 software. This is a software package that is dedicated strictly to water level measurement. And basically how it works is we have this octagon out here, and based on the lengths of these sides of the octagon and the skew and everything else going on there, we can calibrate how large in the real world a pixel is, basically, and if we can detect the edge of the water, then we can actually measure water level. So this program actually is kind of the inspiration for a lot of what I'm going to tell you about. It was written by Ken Chapman. Actually, the original version was written by Ken Chapman about 2009 as part of my undergraduate research project back at North Carolina State. So that's GRIME 2. We're now building out a much broader suite of tools, and we're calling that GRIME AI. And up here is where GRIME comes from. There's no Gilmore in GRIME. There's GaugeCam, Remote Image Manager, Educational, and then we're sticking artificial intelligence on there as well. That name was dreamed up in an early morning session at a lab at NC State, I guess, probably after biscuits and gravy at Pam's farmhouse. But all of our software that we're doing is open source, commercial friendly. If you know licensing, it's Apache 2.0. And GRIME AI, also GRIME 2, they're Windows applications. GRIME AI is all Python based, and we have seen it running at Northern Arizona University on Linux. And also, I'll tell you more, but we're also deploying it, or will be available on high performance computing platforms at NAU and UNL. But this is the software that I'll tell you about, and part of the reason we're working on GRIME AI is because we already had a pretty good solution for this type of image over here on the left, where we've gone out and really modified the scene, right? We stick an octagon out there. The original version, we had a bunch of bow ties out there. And that's a really good way for the software to find something, measure something. So that's a highly conditioned image over on this side. But the reality is most of the images out there in all those archives that I told you about, they're going to fall more in this semi-conditioned area where maybe you have something like a weir or a staff plate or something like that that's kind of a known shape or size in the image that can kind of help you make measurements because you have a reference point of some kind. And then the hardest thing, which is what Emma and Mary started with, is this completely unconditioned image up here where you have hardly anything but the horizon basically. And there's very little reference point. And so GRIME AI is being built so that we can encompass all of this type of imagery and still make it hopefully relatively accessible to a lot of different people. So I want to introduce you to our team a little bit. This group here in the upper left is a lot of the people, or some of the folks that are at the University of Nebraska at Kearney, starting with Mary in the background there, Jamila in the lower right, standing next to our sign, worked as an undergraduate and graduate student, so we have a mix of grad and undergrad, and they're in the biology and the communication department there. Chris in the upper right here is really interested in digital media. He's helped us a lot. He's moved on now. Regine is a new PhD student here at UNL in the BSc department. And then in the dark black outlined boxes here are in the bottom center, that's John Stranzel. He is the architect, the lead developer on GRIME AI. And on the right-hand side here is Ken Chapman, kind of the original GRIME developer. So these are my partners in GRIME right here. Just highlighting here the variety of disciplines involved using this color coding, and a bit longer list of people that are been involved in this project, and I'm sure there's some missing off of there as well. But it's been really enjoyable to work with a wide range of people and backgrounds and perspectives. But the main idea of GRIME AI is to just streamline those kind of complex workflows that you saw earlier. And so I'm going to walk through what would be kind of one version of a data science workflow, basically here. And I'm going to kind of walk through this just to show you a few of the different features that we currently have available in GRIME AI. Of course, this is kind of an iterative process in the real world, but I'm going to kind of go through it in a linear fashion right now. So the first thing is data retrieval. Well, let me mention first that we also are building, we have this linear, I'm showing it linear. The reality is it's going to be iterative if you're trying to get your way all the way over to modeling. And then we're also wanting to have kind of on-ramps and off-ramps as well for people, say, you may only get to the data exploration phase, say in a class project or something like that. Or you may create a really neat visualization that's really valuable to communicate your science or your project or something. And we really have a lot to learn, and we're interested in working with Platte Basin Time-lapse because they are experts in kind of building those narratives and creating a story around different sites and watersheds. And it's really important for us, especially right now, to be able to share that with the public, what we're doing. So moving into the data retrieval stage. So this is an example of, this is the tab we have for the USGS imagery for those 900 or so cameras. And if you click on one of these camera sites over here on the left, it'll show you a bunch of metadata. It'll show you the latest image. If you go ahead and download from that site, and there's a USGS gauge there, we'll go ahead and just grab the USGS streamflow data for you as well. Put that in a folder. PhenoCam, which I mentioned earlier, they have 900 or so cameras, as I mentioned, but a subset of those cameras are co-located with National Ecological Observatory Network sites. Those sites have a bunch of sensors in hubs, like in streams and lakes and so on. They have grab samples, water quality, groundwater elevation, all kinds of data products that they have at those sites. That makes this kind of a virtual lab, basically. If you could go grab some imagery, you can grab a bunch of sensor data, pull that together, and have potentially a project. You can select whatever you want from that list of data products. It takes you over to this download page. You can select the start and end date that you want for the data you're wanting to grab. And importantly, for imagery, you can also select a start and end time. So maybe you don't want to download 30,000 images, but instead you could download just images that are collected around 1 p.m. or something. That way you can get a few years worth of 1 p.m. imagery, check it out, and decide whether you want to invest in really downloading a massive amount of data. So this basically takes a few clicks in order to get your data. It gets you started very quickly, and you don't have to go, for instance, kind of drill down through websites, a variety of websites. You don't have to learn how to use an API, things like that. You can skip all that, and then you end up with things like, oh, here's a bunch of information about here's the actual data from a sensor along with all the metadata and everything that goes with it, and here is my folder full of images that I just downloaded. So now we're at the point where we can start doing something with imagery with just a few clicks. Also, if you collected your own imagery from your trail cam, this is kind of where you're starting in GRIME AI. You've got it on your local disk, and you're going to start operating on it. So the next thing is to prepare your data. So you want clean, actionable data. And an example of that is right here, where a lot of times you're going to have imagery that is maybe too dark, too bright, too blurry. A number of reasons that the images could be kind of low information. So you may want to remove those from your data set. And we always want to put them somewhere else so we still have them, and not just delete them. But importantly, we have a way to track all that, so we can document that. Basically, what you can do is you have settings for brightness, you have settings for how blurry the image is, and based on those settings, it combs through all those folders, identifies images, classifies them, puts it all in a CSV file so you can go back and inspect it. You can come back and change the settings, and you can choose whether or not you want to move those bad images to another folder. Once you have a good clean data set, you can go on to start to explore your data a little bit more. Here's a quantitative way to explore your data. We can load a set of images. We can draw these rectangles on here. So these are kind of hand-drawn areas of interest or regions of interest on this image. And for each of these rectangles, which we have a name for, like this vertical one here, I've named Water 1. And you can see over here, Water 1 has some color swatches. So what our software is doing is it's extracting the dominant colors in this region. It's also calculating the greenness and the intensity and entropy or kind of textural things or features associated with this imagery. You can put as many of these rectangles on here as you want. You can see those calculations, and then you can also just click this button on the lower right-hand side that says Build Feature File, and you'll get a massive CSV with all of this information in it. So then you can start playing around with maybe building a preliminary model or something if you want to. But this is a quantitative way to start exploring your data, like what kind of information is in this image. This is the Pecos River. You see it's kind of an orangish brown color. Other times of the year, or maybe when more time has passed since the most recent storm, you might have a little clearer water or a little more brown color to it. So you start to see relationships between colors and other features in this image that are related to whatever processes that you're interested in. A more qualitative way to look at the imagery is using this composite slice tool that we have. This was inspired by the Platte Basin time-lapse composite slice that you saw earlier, but it's a little bit different because rather than showing kind of the whole image scene, we're taking one slice of the image, and we're doing that repeatedly for all the images in the folder, and then we're stacking them up over time. So time is going from left to right, and what you're seeing here in the lower right-hand composite slice image, you're seeing that red line on the right-hand side of the upper image. You're seeing that repeated over and over again through this whole data set. So this data set actually comes from Steve Comfort and Aaron Middlestedt working on a pond in Lincoln. And in this lower right image, it's pretty clear you're looking at vegetation, and you're seeing those seasonal patterns of green, brown, green, and so on for, we have roughly 2 years worth of data, all kind of compressed into this composite slice image. If you look on the left-hand side, you've got some vegetation over here in the top image, but on the lower left-hand composite image, you can kind of see that vegetation go away in the wintertime. And you also start to see these bands of white here. So you're seeing, okay, we know there's ice cover. And in some cases, there's also white up on the land next to it. So we've got snow, we've got ice cover with snow, for example. These are things that you can see even from just repeating one tiny little slice of the image over and over. And then in the center, which was really the focus of this project, where they have this floating treatment wetland up here, trying to improve the water quality in this pond. If you go along the bottom of the center image from left to right, you go through that wintertime freeze and thaw period, and then you see, boom, there's a period here where you've got an algae right in the front, right? And you can see that green across the bottom of that image. So another thing that you can pick up from the dynamics of what are going on in this data set in a very compact way. So rather than scanning thousands or hundreds of images, you kind of get these composite slices quickly. So I want to introduce you to demonstrate this is Jess Wilhelm and some of our other friends, one of whom's in the front row here. Jess was at Kansas and working on her PhD, and we had a number of Zoom meetings with her, and she actually set up one of these octagon signs at her site down at Kanza, and she used that to measure water level, compare it to a traditional sensor, and she also had other sites where she was working on non-perennial streams, looking at whether the stream was pooled, whether it was flowing, or whether it was completely dry. So kind of the connectedness of these streams in this area. So she did a lot of manual classification by just looking through these images. She also did the GRIME 2 water level measurement. And then we could do some composite slices of some of her sites and see we had some visitors here. Can you tell quite what this is? See a few features here that might clue you in on some bison roaming around this stream bed. But importantly for Jess's work, we can see a dry stream bed at the bottom over and over and over again. So we know this is a dry period. So that's just an example of using kind of exploring data in a way and speeding up that process of working through lots and lots of imagery. And we can also move on now to the modeling part, where we're testing. We might test a hypothesis or build models and try to predict different things. And we'll go back to that original North Platte River Weir project just to give you an example. In that project, what we did were basically what we called handcrafted features, because we identified these regions of interest, upstream of the weir, downstream of the weir. We saw that the water texture was different upstream and downstream depending on the flow rate. We thought that might be interesting, that might have information there. Similarly, we looked at this kind of rectangular area downstream of the weir, looking at how much of that was turbulent water at any given time. However, when you're doing this, you have to anchor. Ken had to find the edge of this weir and the edge of the river here and kind of find a point here as an anchor to try to stabilize these images, so we're looking at roughly the same spots right here. That was one of his challenges. And we're also, obviously, we're intervening basically in what parts of this image scene we're looking at. So what we're interested in now is moving beyond that to automatically just detecting the whole river channel, or maybe just the part of the river channel that has water in it at any given time. Similar to what Emma did on that wetland area. So what we want to do is automatically detect this and then extract information potentially from this whole area. So that's what we did in a project that we just wrapped up with USGS. We took 11 of their sites. Part of this project was building out features of GRIME AI. Part of it was building these models, where each of these sites, we went in, we had students go in there and actually draw polygons around where water was in these images. So that's our training data. That's the kind of the dirty secret of AI, is that actually you need a whole bunch of ground truth data, right? And people actually doing that work to create that data. And so each of these sites, we had between 125 to approximately 1,200 images that were manually annotated for each of these sites. And then for anyone that might be familiar with Segment Anything model from Facebook's or SAM2, we basically had that as our base model. And then we used these images that we had drawn polygons on to tune that model. And we created site-specific models for these 11 sites. And when we run those models now, this is kind of what it looks like. We can detect imperfectly, but we can detect for the most part where water is in these images, right? So if you're wildlife oriented, maybe you'd say we can, we know there's an image, there's an animal in the scene now, right? But and so we know where the water is. But now we want to take the next step, which is start to extract features, start to draw out information from those locations where we have water. And so that's where we're at now, basically, that we can delineate those areas on the images, at least for these sites, where there is water. And the next step is to start to say, what variables do we want to predict based on features that we extract from those areas? So an example could be, as I mentioned earlier, turbidity, right? So you see changes in color and texture and so on. So this is the general concept that can be used for lots of different research questions. I'd introduce you to Juan as well. I mentioned Jess earlier. She got a scholarship to come visit, a little travel fellowship or scholarship to come visit us. Juan also got a Pathfinder fellowship from Kawazi to come visit us here at UNL. We took him out to Kearney to see the Kearney Outdoor Learning Area. But he's working at a site in the Dallas area. He's at the University of Texas, Arlington. This is an extremely flashy site. And so he's going to be working on some high resolution. So they're collecting isotopes, for example, from precipitation and from this river, a lot of different water quality and so on. And so he'll be using GRIME AI to try to delineate where the water is, relate that to stage and potentially to water quality as well. So when we're assisting with model development. So this, just the last few slides here, I'll talk about how we're moving toward deploying models. If you build a model like where you can detect the water in image, or in this case, we can measure water level using our GRIME2 software. We can do composite slices, for example. Those features of GRIME AI are set up to be where we can use command line, basically, to call those and run those features or those capabilities on a server. So Aaron Young set this up on a CSD server so that we have GRIME2 installed. We also have GRIME AI installed. And this is our site out at Kearney that you saw earlier. And basically, right now it's not working because of the shutdown, but we can grab the latest image from USGS, and we can also grab the noon and midnight images, the most recent week. And we can create this image that shows where we found the water level, and we can create this composite slice that shows the last week's water level here, and we can compare that to our sensor for the last week as well. So we have this dashboard set up. You can download data very quickly here as well. And so the idea here, this is right next to Kearney High School. We have teachers there who are interested in using data from right next to the school. So this is a way for students to start exploring that. But again, we're kind of deploying our software on a server there. More broadly, we have projects going on with PhenoCam. And in here, we are, with PhenoCam, we're working on getting GRIME AI in use a couple different ways. First of all, on their high performance computing system, which is called Monsoon, which would be equivalent to our Holland computing center, we are putting GRIME AI on something called Open On Demand. That means that you can log in, open up a virtual machine, you have access to GRIME AI and the computational power of a high performance computing system. So that'll be available it is working now at NAU as of a few days ago, and it will be available at UNL as well. We also have a research component of this project in addition to the cyber infrastructure, where we're now, the things that we did with water, we're basically wanting to do with vegetation now for lots of PhenoCam imagery. And then there's also a collaboration that was led by University of Massachusetts Amherst, where they're working on taking old cell phones, converting them so they're batteryless, and then using them for environmental monitoring. So NAU and UNL will both be kind of testing out their prototypes. So this is the stuff that we're working on right now, and the reason I put this in the kind of model deployment side is that once we build these segmentation models, then GRIME AI will be, or our models will be running in their pipeline, calculating greenness for phenocam imagery as it comes in on a daily basis. So that's what I had for you to share today. We do have a workshop coming up. This is funded by the NSF project. We're calling it Pixels to Environmental Patterns. So you can come to our workshop and listen to some pep talks on cameras and AI for scientific discovery and storytelling. So we're coaxing some PBT folks to help us with that training as well. And it's going to be on a weekend in early March. So welcome any questions you have.
Questions for Professor Gilmore? Had a quick one. So in terms of, I guess I think it was unstructured. I guess how important is it to come to the same location? Like, would you suggest mounting a camera there? Like if you're using your cell phone, like repeating imagery, or what's just some good,
Yeah.
good practice if you want to do like a new site or something?
Yeah. We really harp on keeping the camera as stationary as possible because it's kind of nightmarish. That's one of the things in the data cleaning that really needs inserted in there is being able to anchor images and potentially rotate them or deal with that kind of movement. And from what I've seen, I mean, there may be work out there, but some of the, like the community science type projects, I think there are huge challenges there when you're having different sensors and different, slightly different positions and all of that going on. I think there's potential, but definitely stationary camera is your best bet.
Okay, thanks. Other questions? All right, awesome.
What do you think is like the barrier to starting to use GRIME Labs, say if I want to do like a research project?
That's all right. That's good. So barriers to using GRIME AI in general. One challenge, we're still in a development phase. So the program is changing rapidly. So that's one of the things, like we will work with people and then we're kind of updating or changing things. Sometimes that can be a little bit challenging, but as a lab, we have generally just tried to support people. You know, lots of Zoom calls or in-person meetings with people to try to get them rolling on the software. Other than that, as far as challenges in starting a project, what's your research question? You know, so that's actually one of the challenges because once you stand out at a site and you start thinking, even though I was kind of saying like, oh, you see all kinds of stuff in this image, when you're actually standing at the site, you're saying, there's all this stuff I could look at, which thing am I going to point at? You know, so that's, yeah, go ahead.
Any other questions? Could you talk a little bit more about the sounds? I guess what was the equipment you're trying to, looks like, you know, capture different species or frogs? What's just to explain a little bit more about the technology or how that works with the sound recording?
Yeah, that's a little more Mary Harner's space, but there are definitely people that'll, and maybe some of you could, there are definitely people who are listening for, you know, if you think about ornithologists, they're listening for certain species, calling at certain times. The way that Mary has it set up is recorder that just records like 5 minutes at the top of the hour kind of thing. It's right next to a Platte Basin style camera. And so she's just kind of getting a frequent or a regimented kind of, or a known time step, basically.
Gotcha.
One of the things that stands out actually at COLA is the highway noise. If you can't see it, it's maybe a mile or two away, something like that. But it's interesting that once you kind of start hearing Route 80, you can't kind of unhear it on that audio. It's kind of interesting. So that's kind of the soundscape part. Yeah.
Any final questions for Professor Gilmore? Anybody on the chat ask anything? No. Okay. All right. Well, let's thank Troy one more time.